Good afternoon to everyone. Salamat sa Diyos sa pagkakataong ito na makapag-lecture sa inyo sa NFCPAR, Nation's Foremost CPA Review. And we are going to take up cost accounting. We are using Afar 15 for May 2022 materials. So please get ready with your materials. Okay, so we now proceed, ladies and gentlemen. Ang unahin natin, ladies and gentlemen, ay etong manufacturing cost flow or conventional or traditional manufacturing cost flow. How are the three elements of manufacturing cost accumulated in the system? Okay, so alam nyo lahat ito na mayroong elements of manufacturing cost, yung direct materials, yung direct labor, at yung factory overhead. These three elements, when incurred, will be charged or will be accumulated in the work in process account. And then pag natapos na yung production process, the work in process account will be transferred to finished goods. Yung pong cost of goods manufactured ay ililipat sa account na finished goods. And then, if the products are sold from finished goods, it will be debited to cost of goods sold. So, tandaan po nyo itong flow ng manufacturing cost dahil all throughout our lecture on cost accounting, we will be dealing with this flow of manufacturing cost, except of course, pag ang tinake up natin ay backflash costing under just-in-time manufacturing, because the cost flow there is different from this traditional. So please be familiar with this flow of manufacturing cost, and I am hoping that everybody is familiar as well dun sa accounting ng materials, labor, and factory overhead, so that we can focus on the job order costing. But of course, we will take up yung direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, yung specific accounting ng bawat element. But of course, we will do that in a fast-paced. Our focus on Afar 15 is job order costing, in particular, the losses in job order costing. Okay, so we now proceed to accounting for materials. The first element of manufacturing cost is the direct materials. Ang direct materials ay lahat ng materials that can be traced directly sa finished product. Ito yung mga materials that form an integral part of the product. Some materials na ginagamit maaaring insignificant or not integral portion or part of the finished product. They are indirect materials. Traditionally, the raw materials account is maintained for both direct and indirect materials. In the sequence of transactions, and of course the entries that you must be familiar with in accounting, ay ang mga sumusunod: purchase ng raw materials, issuance of the raw materials to the production department, in case mayroong excess dun sa materials issued to production that will be returned to storage, or in case there is a return to suppliers, ito ay purchase returns, ano? And allowances, purchase returns, allowances, it can be, yan ang mga karaniwang entries na maiinkwentro ninyo pagdating sa ating accounting for raw materials. So it's very simple, ladies and gentlemen, to record purchase of raw materials under perpetual system. Debit raw materials inventory or simply raw materials, then credit to accounts payable or cash. When materials are issued to production, if the materials issued are direct materials, i-debit po yon sa work in process. While indirect materials issued, that will be debited to factory overhead control. And of course, credit to raw materials inventory. To record return to storage to department or to the warehouse. Ito po yung sobrang raw materials ibabalik ng production department sa storage department. So, debit to raw materials inventory and credit to work in process for the direct materials and credit to factory overhead control for the indirect materials. In the case of purchase return to suppliers, debit to accounts payable and credit to raw materials inventory. Yan po ang mga sequence ng entries na mai-encounter ninyo or na dapat ninyong i-master dito po sa accounting for raw materials. Now, yung costing yan as to what amount will be debited to work in process or to debited to factory overhead control when issued, may mga costing technique na i-apply pa dyan, of course. According to pass number 2, we can use the first in, first out, the average method, and of course, there is also this specific identification. Ayan, na-take up nyo na yung mga yun sa inyong financial accounting. Gagamitin din yun dito in accounting for inventories ng raw materials. Now, pagdating sa pag-compute ng direct materials used, ito po ang magiging pro forma computation. Raw materials beginning, we add the net purchases. Yun pong net purchases ay yung gross purchases minus returns and allowances. And you can compute this raw materials available for use. Then from there, we deduct the following. Raw materials end. And then don't forget to deduct indirect materials used. Ito kasing indirect materials used, ladies and gentlemen, sa factory overhead control naka-charge yan. Kaya ima-minus nyo yan in order to compute direct materials used. Otherwise, kapag hindi nyo dinidak po yan, madoduplicate yung charging. Kasi nandun na yan sa factory overhead control. Overstated itong mako-compute yung direct materials used. We are computing for direct materials used. Kaya, yung indirect materials used together with the raw materials ending, that will be deducted dun sa total raw materials available for use. Yan po ang pag-compute ng ating raw materials. And the entries to record purchase, to record issuance, to record return to storage, and to record the return to suppliers. Okay, so let us illustrate that accounting for materials using this problem, ladies and gentlemen. Problem 6. This one. Problem 6 of your Afar 15 material. ABC Company Manufacturing Firm had the following transactions for 2022. And the requirement are the following. journal entries, and then T account for materials, and then the computation of the direct materials used. The entries are, ito po ang mga entries. Hindi naman mahirap ito klase actually. Madali lang naman. Fundamental ng cost accounting ito eh. To record the purchase of raw materials on account, so you have here, debit to raw materials, credit to accounts payable. Then, to record the issuance of materials, 150,000 direct materials, and then 5,000 for indirect. So, debit to work in process, debit to factory overhead control, and of course, credit to raw materials for 155,000. Okay. Then, to record the return to suppliers, debit accounts payable, and credit to raw materials. That's for the transaction letter C. And then, for return to storage, debit raw materials, then credit work in process dun sa direct materials na ibinalik from production department, then credit to factory overhead control. Ayan. So, mapapansin ninyo ngayon, ladies and gentlemen, ang mga dinedebit sa raw materials inventory ay yung purchase at yung return to storage department. Credit naman yung issuance and then yung return to suppliers. Now, here is the T account for our raw materials inventory. So, the beginning is 25,000. In yung transaction letter A, yung purchases, debit 200,000. Yung transaction letter D, na nakadebit po yung raw materials doon sa return to storage department. And then you have credit 155,000. Yan po yung issuance. 150,000 dyan po ay direct at yung 5,000 indirect. And then credit 8,000 for the return to the suppliers. Debit accounts payable and credit to raw materials. Ayan. So, to determine your ending, ito po, marireconstruct ninyo yan. So, the total of the debits is this, 232,000. So, the total credit must be, ito, pupus lang natin dito for T account analysis. So, 232,000 minus the 155 minus 8,000, then ending must be 69,000. And that is already given, ladies and gentlemen. We are just trying to prove the information in letter E saying ending inventory of raw materials showed 69,000 at the end of the year. And so, that's it. Ito po yung na-determine natin na ending. And to compute our direct materials used, it's very simple, guys. Raw materials beginning plus net purchases. 200,000 yung gross purchases, tapos mayroong returns na 8,000. So, we have 192. Total raw materials available for use, 617. Then, we deduct the ending raw materials, which is 69,000. And, of course, the indirect materials used na 4,000. Initially, 5,000 po yung issued here. And then, there is a return to storage na 1,000. So, ang indirect materials used po ay ito, 4,000 lang po. So, 217 minus 73. Our direct materials used is 144,000. 144,000. Now, we can always verify that from our entries. Actually, dito sa entries natin, identifiable yung direct materials used eh. Look at this. Kung magkano yung dinebit mo sa work in process, minus of course, pag kinredit mo yan. Ito po, work in process, 150,000, dinebit natin initially. Then, kinredit natin yan for 6,000 return to storage. O di 144, yan din po yun of course, yung kinumpute natin dito na 144,000 using our pro forma computation. Yan. So, There are no intricacies in accounting for raw materials, ladies and gentlemen. So, that is manageable. That is not difficult item in cost accounting, actually. In case ibigay sa board examination, aba, pasalamat tayo. Sa mga nakalipas na exams, paminsan-minsan, meron din yan eh. Okay? Anyway, so that's it for the raw materials. Now, we also take up this tungkol sa management ng raw materials. And I believe you are familiar with this, economic ordered quantity. In your MAS, na-take up nyo to sa financial management, inventory management in particular. So, ano ang formula ng economic ordered quantity? Yan po kasing inventory, mayroong cost associated with maintaining the inventory. There is the carrying cost of the inventory. And of course, yung pag-order ng inventory, there is a cost involved there. So what is the most economical order size or order quantity that will minimize the total of the ordering and carrying cost? Alam po ninyo, itong ordering cost at saka carrying cost, may trade-off yan. As in, as you try to minimize the ordering cost by ordering in large order size, bigger order sizes, the average inventory increases. And so, yung carrying cost, of course. Now, if we try to minimize the carrying cost by just maintaining small quantities of inventory, that would entail many orders to be placed. Kaya mami-minimize mo nga yung carrying cost, kaya lang yung ordering cost, mataas naman. So, may trade-off. So, what is the order size ngayon? That will minimize the total of the ordering cost and the carrying cost. Yun po ang sinasagot ng EOQ. And, ito ang formula ng economic order quantity, ano? Square root of 2 times annual usage or annual demand or annual requirement for inventory times ordering cost per unit divided by the carrying cost per unit. Square root po niyan. Ayan. So in this case, 2 times 20,000 times 20 divided by 5, the most economical order quantity is 400. 400. Any order size below 400 or more than 400, ang total cost natin dyan mag-i-increase. Yan ang pinaka economical order. EOQ nga no? Ang purpose niyang EOQ ay i-determine yung order size that will minimize the total of the ordering cost and the carrying cost. At mapapansin niyo dito, ladies and gentlemen, at EOQ, the ordering cost and the carrying cost, yung total ordering tsaka total carrying, equal lagi yan. In graphical format ng pag-solve ng EOQ, yung EOQ actually, that is the intersection ng ordering cost line at saka carrying cost line. Kaya pareho yan, equal po yan. Okay, we try to illustrate. If the order size is 400 units, so tuwing mag-o-order, mag-place ng order, it will be for 400 items or 400 units. If your order size is 400, ang average inventory mo is 200 units. And how to determine that? That's very simple. Order size divided by 2. In this case, because our order size is the EOQ, EOQ divided by 2. So, 200. And the number of orders to be placed will be If 20,000 will be the requirement, di 20,000 divided by 400, 50 times kang bibili. 50 times kang mag-place ng order. Hence, ito po yung computation. Ang total ordering cost natin, 50 times tayong mag-place ng order, and every time we place an order, it will cost us 20 pesos. So 50 times 20, that's 1,000. Our average inventory is 200. At 200 times 5, the total carrying cost is 1,000. And the total of the ordering and the carrying cost is 2,000. Pansinin nyo, pareho, ano? Yan. Ngayon, ladies and gentlemen, ito pong model na to, AOQ, is a deterministic model. And it uses the following inherent assumption sa pag-compute or pag-solve. Una, EOQ assumes that the demand or the usage or the annual requirement is constant. Assuming 20,000, that's constant for the year. The reality is it will vary. Magbabago-bago yung yung requirement kasi depende kung ano ang needs. Depende kung ilan ang demand. But to simplify the computation, we assume that the annual usage is constant. The other assumption ay delivery is instantaneous. As in, pagka-place ng order, yan, deliver agad. Nandiyan na. To simplify the computation. But of course, that's not the reality. Because there will be a lead time. There will be lead time. And because of that variability and uncertainty in usage and lead time, we can add or we can modify this model by maintaining safety stock level and of course determining the lead time usage. For purposes of computing the reorder point. Yung reorder point is yan po yung inventory level that will trigger the company to place the order na, no? So, kung ganyan na yung level ng inventory mo, 280, halimbawa, kailangan mo na mag-place ng order. 5 araw bago dumating yung order, that's the lead time usage, tapos may safety stock na 200. So, here in our problem number 7, the reorder point is lead time usage plus safety stock. Yung ating pong lead time is 5 days. And then safety stock is 200. Excuse me. The number of work days in a year is 250. Kaya 250 at rather 20,000 times 250, that's the daily usage, ano? Times natin dyan yung 5 days. Kasi 5 days yung lead time. So, yung 20,000 over 250, $20,000 divided by 250, yan po yung daily usage rate. And then, kung 5 days ang i-maintain, 80 times 5, that's the 400. And then safety stock na 200. So we have here 600 units. Yan po. Yan. So ang ating lead time usage is 200 over 250, 20,000 over 250 times 5. Ito po yung class, ano? Kikita nyo dito na annual usage ng materials 20,000 and there are 250 work days in a year, so the daily requirement ng raw materials is 20,000 divided by 250, that's 80 per day. So kung lead time natin ay 5 days, 5 times 80, that's 400 plus the safety stock na 200, yan po yung ating reorder point. So if inventory of raw materials falls to 600 units, ayun, kailangan mag-place ng order. 5 days bago dumating, gagamitin mo yung 400 units. Pag na-delay yung delivery, yung lead time halimbawa naging 6 days or 7 days, you have reserve or buffer yung safety stock. Or pag yung daily usage ay nag-increase from 80, naging 100 or 90, you have that safety stock. Ang purpose ng safety stock ay to compensate for variability in lead time days and in lead time usage. Yan po ang tungkol sa economic ordered quantity, and yan po ay sa inyong MAS. At take up ninyo yan. Inventory management. Okay, we return to the elements of manufacturing cost. This time, we proceed to labor. Yan. Accounting for labor. So, generally, yung labor, it can be manufacturing or non-manufacturing. But of course, if we are accounting for product cost, product costing tayo, ang pinag-uusapan nating payroll dito, syempre yung manufacturing labor or manufacturing payroll. But in general, of course, yung labor or payroll, manufacturing, non-manufacturing. Non-manufacturing, kuwan yun, selling, general, and administrative expenses. Yung manufacturing, we will classify that into direct and indirect labor. Yung direct labor, yun ang charge natin sa work in process. Indirect labor, yun po ay factory overhead. There are 10 entries, ladies and gentlemen, na nangyayari dito sa ating labor accounting. And assuming payroll control account is used. The first is, of course, computation ng payroll. That will be computed. And then, it will be accrued. So, the first entry will be accrual ng payroll, assuming gumagamit ng payroll control account. Yung total na payroll na na-compute, ito po, debit to payroll, then, credit to SSS, Pag-ibig, and PhilHealth payable, ito yung employees' share. Credit to withholding taxes payable. Yung employer kasi, ano yan? Withholding agent. Withholding tax at source. Silang magre-remit sa Bureau of Internal Revenue. And then, for the net, we have salaries and wages payable. Of course, pag mayroon pang mga ibang deduction like union dues or advances or loans, nakabawas din dyan. Okay? So, the net will be credit to salaries and wages payable. Ayan. The next will be, itong payroll control account. Control account lang yan, ladies and gentlemen, temporary. Ang purpose niyan, para ma-minimize yung posting in the wrong account. At yung, that's a control actually, internal control. In order to prevent misposting and missed calculation or miscomputation. So, ang na-compute na payroll, Nakadebit muna sa payroll control account. Pag kumpleto na yung mga attachments or mga supporting documents for our analysis, yun pong payroll control account that was initially debited, that will be closed or that will be allocated or that will be distributed kung ano ang appropriate na account na charges. So, pag na-determine na kung magkano ang direct labor, kasi dyan sa pag-determine kung magkano ang direct labor in the case of job order costing, you're going to wait for the submission, of course, of the job time tickets from the production department. Yun ang magsusupport dyan eh. For the direct labor, de-debit ninyo sa work in process. For the indirect labor cost, manufacturing cost ang pinag-uusapan natin dito manufacturing labor cost na indirect. Debit to factory overhead control. And then for the non-manufacturing labor, debit to selling, general, and administrative expenses. And then, of course, credit to payroll para ma-close yun. Yan, in case mayroong self-construction ng PPE, pwede rin mag-allocate doon sa PPE. Kung nakasama doon yung total, sa total payroll, of course, you have done that sa inyong accounting, sa financial accounting. But we limit our entries and our illustration dito sa product costing lang. So that is the entry to distribute the payroll control account to appropriate charges, work in process for DL, factory overhead control for indirect labor, and then selling, general, and administrative expenses for the non-manufacturing labor. Then close the payroll account, credit. The next transaction na mangyayari dyan, of course, payment ng payroll. It could happen few days after the cut-off or sometimes earlier. But of course, yung entry ang ating concern dyan, kundi kung kailan, no? At alam nyo dapat kung kailan yan i-record, kung nabayaran na. So, debit to salaries and wages payable and credit to cash. Okay? So, mapapansin nyo ngayon, ladies and gentlemen, ito, debit to work in process na naman. Kanina po, sa may raw materials, work in process tayo. We are trying to illustrate this, guys. Ito. Itong manufacturing cost flow. Yung three elements ng manufacturing cost, nagkikita-kita dito, nagtatagpo-tagpo sa work in process account habang nangyayari ang manufacturing process. Pag natapos na, lilipat sa finished goods. Pag nabenta, lilipat sa cost of goods sold. Okay? So, yan po ang ating labor. Yan po ang ating labor cost accounting. Ngayon po, dito sa may SSS, Pag-ibig and PhilHealth, meron ding share ang employer dyan. Hindi po ito ating share. Hindi ito yung share ng employer class, ha? Ang dinideduct natin sa payroll is the employee's share. Yung share ng employer sa SSS, Pag-ibig, PhilHealth, charge natin yon sa factory overhead control. Of course, if the payroll is attributable to manufacturing labor costs. Otherwise, that will be charged to selling, general, and administrative expenses. Tawag doon sa ibang jurisdiction, they call that as payroll taxes. Okay? Next, sabay na natin tong factory overhead. Ang direct materials at direct labor, if we are going to classify the three elements of manufacturing cost according to traceability or in relation to cost object. Yung cost object natin, of course, yung products. Ang classification ng DM and DL, well, na-describe na, direct, direct cost. Ang factory overhead, indirect, because this is not traceable. This is not conveniently traceable dun sa ating output or sa finished product. Nonetheless, according to pass number 2, this factory overhead is a product cost because this is a necessary element of manufacturing. So, lahat ng manufacturing cost, which cannot be classified, of course, as DM and DL, dito po sa factory overhead. Napakarami ng klaseng cost na mapupunta dyan sa ating factory overhead. And for purposes of accounting ng ating factory overhead, ay meron tayong pag-uusapan uli na valuation system or cost accounting system. Nandun sa inyong handouts, Afar 15, ano? Yung tungkol sa valuation system. Ito po, valuation methods or cost accounting system. Meron tayong actual costing, meron tayong normal costing, meron tayong standard costing. Sa actual costing, ang cost na ina-accumulate natin sa work in process na magiging product cost ay puro mga actual cost incurred, actual materials, actual labor, actual factory overhead. Under the normal cost system, ang factory overhead ay estimated or predetermined. So, under the normal costing, ang overhead na ide-debit sa work in process or i-apply is based on the predetermined overhead rate. Pag standard costing naman, lahat predetermined, lahat estimated. Standard materials, standard labor, and standard factory overhead. We go back sa ating factory overhead. Ito po ang routine na entries na mangyayari dyan sa accounting for factory overhead. Una, recording of actual overhead. As actual overhead is incurred, ito po, i-accumulate muna natin sa control account. Hindi muna natin i-debit directly sa work in process. I-maintain muna natin sa control account ng factory overhead control kasi nga napakarami niyan eh. Hindi nga natin alam kung tamang naging classification kasi mag-classify pa yan, mag-allocate pa pagdating sa computation. Meron pa tayong allocation ng kung magkano sa manufacturing, magkano sa sales, etc., etc. So, we will use the factory overhead control account to record the actual factory overhead. We will accumulate the actual overhead incurred in that account, factory overhead control. And here is the pro forma entry. Debit factory overhead control and credit to accounts payable, cash, accumulated depreciation, etc. Marami yan, class. Depende kung ano ang ating na-incur na nature ng factory overhead. Well, yung itong i-record natin sa handouts na to ay actual and normal costing. Of course, sa standard costing, ganyan din naman ang entry to record the actual factory overhead incurred. Ang tinutukoy ko dyan na actual and normal costing ay ang ating i-record, take up, in the meantime, ay actual and normal costing. Because we shall have separate material for the standard costing. Na na-take up nyo na rin yun sa MAS, mas malamang kaysa hindi. Now, ang susunod will be application ng overhead sa production department. Pag actual costing po, wala tayong predetermined overhead rate. Kung magkano yung total accumulated amount sa factory overhead control, itra-transfer mo lang yon sa work in process. So, ang pro forma doon, under actual costing, to transfer factory overhead to work in process, debit to work in process inventory credit factory overhead control. Actual costing po yan ha, kung saan yung actual overhead incurred, yun ang ating dinedebit sa work in process or charge sa work in process. Like this. Kapag actual costing, debit to work in process and credit to factory overhead control, pagka record ng entry na yun, narito na silang lahat sa work in process, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? Ngayon, under the normal costing, kung saan mayroon tayong predetermined factory overhead rate, ang ating charge sa work in process inventory is based on that predetermined rate. And we call that applied factory overhead. Debit to work in process inventory and credit to applied factory overhead. Na yung applied factory overhead, kino-compute po yan, imo-multiply lang po yung predetermined rate doon sa actual capacity attained. Kung ano ang capacity based sa pag-determine ng rate, halimbawa, machine hours, ang overhead rate, kino-compute po yun, estimate of factory overhead or budgeted factory overhead divided by the estimated capacity or normal capacity in most cases. Pero pag magko-compute ka na ng applied, yung predetermined rate, imo-multiply mo dun sa actual na machine hours or actual capacity attained. Yan po. Iba naman pag standard costing. Maalaman nyo rin kung hindi nyo pa alam. Balang araw, dun sa ating ibang materials. Or mas malamang kaysa hindi, tapos nyo na rin yan sa MASF. Okay? Ngayon, pag actual costing, wala po tayong predetermined, Kung magkano lang yung na-accumulate mo sa factory overhead control, transfer mo lang dyan sa work in process at i-close mo lang yung factory overhead control. Pero dito po, sa ating normal costing, may naka-debit na factory overhead control account. Tapos, meron tayong credit na applied factory overhead. Pag hindi yan equal, meron tayong over or under applied ng factory overhead. I-close din yan. Temporary account lang naman tong factory overhead control at saka applied factory overhead. Pag kinlose natin yan and we determine the over or under applied, ganito po ang mangyayari. So first, we determine over or under applied overhead. How? Actual factory overhead, ito po yung factory overhead control. Less applied factory overhead. It's either under or over applied. Pag yung actual ay greater than the applied, that's under. Pag positive yung amount dyan, under applied. Pag negative yan, over applied. And yan po, yung over or under applied, ay meron tayong method sa disposition. If the over or under applied is insignificant, simply close the cost of goods sold. If over or under applied is material and significant, allocate the over or under applied to cost of goods sold, finished goods inventory, and work in process inventory. Prorate mo doon. At ang labas niyan, ibinabalik natin sa actual costing. Bakit kailangan ganon? Material yung amount Significant yung amount. Mami-misstate. Magkakaroon ng misstatement if you do not do that. Anyway, if the problem is silent, the default there will be close to cost of goods sold. Kasi ideally, in a properly determined or properly estimated na overhead rate, hindi dapat yan nagiging significant or material amount ng over or under applied. But of course, pwede namang mangyari. Ulitin ko pag material or significant, allocate. Cost of goods sold, finished goods, work in process. Pag immaterial, insignificant, Close lang sa cost of goods sold. Debit applied factory overhead. Debit cost of goods sold kung under-applied. Credit naman ang cost of goods sold kung over-applied. Then close the factory overhead control. Okay, we proceed to the illustrative entries for labor and overhead. Ito po. Problem 8 ng ating Afar 15 material. XYZ incurred the following costs for the month of June, and payroll is accrued monthly and paid on the 5th of the following month. Ito po yung DL 80, indirect labor cost 10, other indirect manufacturing cost paid 40, SSS premiums, PhilHealth and Pag-ibig, yung share ng employer, then month-end data for adjustment. The requirements are the following: journal entries for labor and overhead, including the adjustments. So here are the entries, ladies and gentlemen. This is not difficult. Identifiable naman na dyan kung magkano ang payroll. Yung direct at indirect, 80 and 10. Assuming, we disregard the salary deductions, kasi wala tayong data na binigay. But of course, pag binigay, ima-minus nyo dyan sa payroll para ma-credit nyo yung net sa accrued payroll or salaries and wages payable. Okay? So, debit to payroll, credit 90,000, payroll 90,000, credit accrued payroll, or salaries and wages payable, or payroll payable, depende kung anong account title na ginagamit ng company, of course, Yan, 90,000. Then, to distribute or to close the payroll account na 90, 80,000 doon DL, 10,000 indirect. So, debit work in process, 80,000. Debit to factory overhead control, 10,000. And close the payroll account, 90. Then, pag nagbayad yan on the 5th of July, itong magiging entry ninyo, debit to accrued payroll, credit to cash, 90,000. Okay. We record the overhead control or the overhead incurred. During the month, 40,000 overhead is paid, So, debit to factory overhead control, 40,000, credit cash, 40,000. Ngayon, ito po, yung binanggit ko kanina, yung tungkol sa payroll taxes, yung share ng employer sa SSS, PhilHealth, and Pag-ibig. If the payroll is attributable to manufacturing labor cost, ide-debit nyo yan sa factory overhead control. Ngayon, kung non-manufacturing o the SG&A, selling, general, and administrative expenses. Okay? So, factory overhead control, 5,000, credit to SSS, contributions payable, PhilHealth contributions, Pag-ibig contributions. Ayan. Ito ang importante. Yan. Dapat alam ninyo na naka-charge yan dyan sa factory overhead control. Next, month-end data for adjustment. Yung depreciation, 6,000. Property taxes, 1,000. Expired insurance, 2,500. Supplies used, 1,200. Total niyan, 10,700. So, debit to factory overhead control, 10,700. And here are the credits, of course. Okay? So, your factory overhead control ngayon, if you will go over the entries, ito po, may debit na 10, may debit na 40, may debit na 5, may debit na 10,700. Ang total niyan, yan po yung actual factory overhead incurred for the month of June. And the total of that is ito, 65,700. Yung debit balance ng ating factory overhead control. Ngayon, we go to letter B, requirement letter B. If overhead is applied at a rate of 120% of DL cost, prepare journal entry to record application of overhead to production. This is normal costing, 120% of DL cost. And the entry to close over or under applied to cost of goods sold. Okay, so here is the entry to record the applied overhead. 80,000 yung ating DL times 120%. So your applied is 96. Debit to work in process, 96,000. And credit to applied factory overhead, 96. Ngayon, ito po yung ating computation ng over-applied. Mas mataas yung applied kaysa actual. So that is over-applied. Negative amount, So we are going to credit the cost of goods sold. I-close lang natin yung applied na 96. So debit po yun. I-close yung factory overhead control. I-credit 65,700. And the balance 30,300. That is credit to cost of goods sold. Credit to cost of goods sold. Yan po ang ating tungkol sa factory overhead. Actual costing, pero kung actual costing yan, ladies and gentlemen, wala tayong entering ganito. Kung actual costing, debit to work in process, 65,700, and credit to factory overhead control, 65,700. Yun ang magiging entry sa application. Of course, wala tayong over or under applied in that case. Kasi kung ano yung actual, yun lang ang tinatransfer sa work in process. Ayan. So, na-illustrate na po natin yung 3 elements ng manufacturing cost na nagtagpo-tagpo na sa work in process na account. Now, from work in process, pag natapos na yung production, ililipat naman na sa finished goods. And if sold, ililipat natin sa cost of goods sold. Okay. We illustrate using problem number 3 to complete our illustration hanggang sa pag-record ng cost of goods manufactured and cost of goods sold. Okay, so we will use the problem number 3 this time to illustrate, to complete our, manufacturing cost flow. Ito po, problem number 3. Entries for the following. Purchase raw material on account, 56,700. Requisition, the raw material for production. 80% ng purchases ay direct. 15% ng purchases indirect. Then direct labor wages, 33,100 are accrued as our indirect labor wages of 12,500. Then overhead incurred and paid, 66,900. Overhead is applied at the rate of 110% of DL cost. Goods costing 97,600 completed. Yan po yung cost of goods manufactured. Goods costing 51,320 were sold on account. 77,600. So, ito po ang mga magiging entries natin. Ayan. Debit raw materials, credit accounts payable, 56,700. To record the issuance, debit to work in process for the direct materials, debit to factory overhead control for indirect materials. 80% ng purchases, Then this one, 15% ng purchases. Credit raw materials inventory. Then to record our labor cost, and we bypass the payroll control account this time kasi identifiable naman na, Well, not all illustrations, not all textbooks, not all reviewers will be using that, Well, in manual labor, of course, or in manual payroll system, talagang gumagamit sila doon. May payroll control account. Pero kung updated naman yung records at identifiable naman na kung magkano, eh, pwede namang diretsyo na yan eh. Okay, so, wag na tayong gagamit ng payroll account, ano? Diretsyo na tayo. Debit work in process, 33,100. Debit factory overhead control for the indirect labor. And credit to salaries and wages payable. Then the overhead incurred and paid, 66,900. Ito po yan, ano? Excuse me. Ito, letter D. Information letter D. Or, yes, information letter D. So, debit to factory overhead control, credit cash, 66,900. Now, to record the applied overhead, yung ating rate ng overhead application is 110% of DL cost. So, ito po. Yung DL cost, kanina, no? Ito po, 33,100. So, debit to work in process and credit to applied factory overhead. Ayan, to record application ng overhead. Then, to record CGM, or cost of goods manufactured, debit finished goods, credit work in process. And then, pag nabenta na po, ito, debit to cost of goods sold, and credit to finished goods. Yan. So, nakompleto na natin yung cost flow, ano? Yung tracking ng 3 elements of manufacturing cost hanggang sa mapunta sa cost of goods sold. Yan. Okay, so I hope that is clear, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we go to computation ng cost of goods manufactured. Ito po yung pro forma na computation. Well, hindi naman mahirap yan eh. Sa totoo lang, ano? Ito po. Yung direct materials used na na-compute. We add their direct labor cost. We add the applied overhead. In the case of actual costing, yung factory overhead control. That's the total manufacturing cost for the period. Then we add their work in process inventory beginning to compute or to determine the total cost of goods in process or total cost of goods placed in process. Less work in process ending, yan po ang cost of goods manufactured. In the problems na pwede nyong ma-encounter ay maaaring hindi given yung beginning and ending inventory. Instead, yung change, increase or decrease. You must know how to do it, ano? How to adjust it to compute the cost of goods manufactured. Pag ang work in process inventory nag-increase, mas mataas yung ending kaysa beginning. Parang yun ang ending na lang. I-treat nyo na parang ending, kaya dideduct nyo yun pag increase in inventory. Total manufacturing cost minus increase in work in process inventory, yun ang CGM. Kung decrease naman, mas mataas yung beginning inventory ng work in process at mas mataas yung ina-add, ibig sabihin. So, i-add nyo naman yun to compute the cost of goods manufactured. Ulitin ko, total manufacturing cost minus increase in work in process inventory, CGM yun. Or total manufacturing cost plus decrease in work in process. Plus decrease in work in process, CGM yun. Ulitin ko ha, total manufacturing cost plus decrease in work in process, CGM. Or Total manufacturing cost minus increase in work in process. That's cost of goods manufactured. Of course, for reconstruction purposes, baka ang hanapin or i-reconstruct manufacturing cost, mag-i-start sa cost of goods manufactured, you must know how to reverse the operation, ano? Yung dati yung dinidak, minus nyo, and vice versa. Yan, ang ating cost of goods manufactured na nare-record natin sa pamamagitan ng entry na debit to finished goods and credit to work in process. And then to compute the cost of goods sold, cost of goods manufactured, add finished goods beginning, that's the total cost of goods available for sale or tigas, less finished goods end, we have your cost of goods sold. Same analysis, ladies and gentlemen, kapag hindi given yung amount ng beginning at ending finished goods, instead ang given ay yung increase or decrease in finished goods. Pag nagsimula kayo sa cost of goods manufactured at nag-decrease ang finished goods inventory, i-add nyo yun. Ano? Kasi pag nag-decrease yung finished goods, maraming nabenta. Ibig sabihin nun. Pero pag nag-increase, pag nag-increase yung inventory, mas mataas yung ending finished goods kaysa beginning. Ibig sabihin nun, nag-increase yung ending finished goods, ma-minus nyo naman. Mas marami ang na-produce kaysa nabenta. Ibig sabihin nun. Kaya from cost of goods manufactured, bididak. And of course, if working backward, you must know how to do it right. Okay? Now, under the normal costing, yung ating cost of goods sold, maaaring may adjustment yon pag mayroong over or under applied factory overhead. Huwag niyong kalimutan na yung cost of goods sold na normal, i-adjust pa yon plus or minus, depende kung over or under applied. Pag under applied, add sa cost of goods sold, pag over, deduct. At yun po ang magiging adjusted amount ng cost of goods sold. Okay? Class, this is not a complex computation. I believe you all guys have mastered this. So for problems 1 and 2 regarding computation ng cost of goods manufactured and cost of goods sold, yan po. Yan. Hindi ko na masyadong i-detail po yan. For problem number 1, 41,000 yung ating CGM and 39,000 yung cost of goods sold. For problem number 2, 511 yung ating cost of goods manufactured and 505,000 naman yung ating cost of goods sold. At ito po yung ating computation, of course. Yan, yung solution yan. Yan. So, this will be made available sa inyo kung kakailanganin ninyo. Yan po. Yan. 41,000 and 39,000. Okay? I hope that is clear. Now, before we proceed to job order costing, tapusin natin tong mga reconstruction ng amounts and accounts para maging familiar sa correlation and reconstruction, relationship ng mga accounts at kung paano mag-determine ng mga unknown. Problem number 4. We compute the cost of goods manufactured, working backward, and we determine prime cost and conversion cost. All right, we proceed. The amount of the cost of goods sold is 345. Ito po. overhead is applied at 50% of DL cost. And yung purchases is 110,000. 110,000. So here's the computation ng cost of goods manufactured. It's very simple. Starting from your cost of goods sold, working backward, 345,000 cost of goods sold, add ending finished goods, minus beginning finished goods inventory. Ayan, 348,000 yung ating cost of goods sold. Cost of goods manufactured. Now, to compute our prime cost, yung prime cost po is the sum of direct materials used and direct labor. Yung conversion cost naman, labor and factory overhead. So, by reconstruction po dito, yung ating CGM 348, we need to determine the total manufacturing cost, So, we add work in process end, we deduct work in process beginning, and our total manufacturing cost for November is 344,000. Then, from there, we deduct the direct materials used. Ang purchases po ay 110,000, and then 20,000 yung ating beginning, 26,000 yung ending. So, the direct materials used is 104. 344 na total manufacturing cost. Yan po yung tatlo, yung direct materials used, yung DL, tsaka factory overhead. So, if we deduct our direct materials used there, the conversion cost is 240. And then, we make an analysis of that dahil 50% of DL yung ating overhead. So, the 240,000 is the combined 100% na DL and overhead na 50% ng DL. Total 150% yan, yung 240. Kaya 240 over 1.5, yan yung DL 160 and the applied overhead is 80. So, our prime cost is 104,000 plus 160 na DL, that's 264,000. Okay? Yan. Next, another reconstruction ng account. Etong problem number 5, using T account. So, this is a T account analysis. And we will relate the following accounts. Kung paano i-determine po yan. Okay, so, ito po yung balances, October 1 and October 31. Sa work in process, October 31, ito po, letter D, information letter D. Kikita nyo sa information letter D. Dito po. At the end of October, the work in process account had 2,000 of materials, 6,000 of DL, and 30,000 of overhead charged to it. So, 2 plus 6 plus 3,000, Yan po yung ating ending work in process. So, magkano po yan? 11,000. 2 plus 6 plus 3, 11,000. And here are the actual factory overhead. 20, 55, 10, 2, and 13. Then it says that materials and supplies purchased on account were 65. It says further, in information letter B, na yung accounts payable is used for materials and supplies only. Okay? We now reconstruct the following. Using T account, we determine materials issued to production, DL, total factory overhead, CGM, cost of goods sold, payment of accounts payable, collection of accounts receivable, and payment of payroll. Ito po yung magiging reconstruction ng account natin. Ang beginning materials and supplies ay 20,000. Ang ending 15,000. Purchases 65,000. Debit materials and supplies credit accounts payable, yan ang entry. So, the total debits, 20 and 65, that's 85. So, we will reconstruct kung magkano ang credit na nangyari. 85 minus 15 na ending. Abay, yun pala ay 70,000. Now, in information letter E, you can find here that the supplies used, which will be chargeable to overhead, 20,000. Yung materials and supplies account, magkasama dyan, yung materials at saka supplies. Yung materials is referring to the direct in this case. Ayan. So, kung 20,000 yung supplies used, ito po yung tinatanong na letter A. 50,000 materials issued. And when that was issued, credit materials and supplies, 50,000. And debit to work in process. Ito, mapupunta sa work in process yon. Etong 20,000, debit factory overhead control yan. And credit to materials and supplies. Okay? So, okay na tayo sa materials, ladies and gentlemen. I-relate natin sa accounts payable na rin. Kasi kailangan natin yung amount ng payment. Simple T account analysis. Beginning, accounts payable, purchases, credit. So, total credits, 83, minus ending na 6. So, we have 77,000 payment. Debit accounts payable, credit to cash. Next, we analyze payroll. We analyze payroll. We analyze DL. And we determine factory overhead. In information letter E, ito po yung total factory overhead. 20,000 supplies, indirect labor 55, depreciation 10,000, insurance 2,000, and then miscellaneous overhead 13. So, ang total po niyan, 100,000. 20, 55 plus 10, that's 85 plus 2 and 13. So, that's 100,000. Ayan. As that is incurred, debit sa factory overhead control, and then, pag in-apply na yan, actual costing tayo, ililipat yan sa work in process. So, ito po. Debit to work in process and credit to factory overhead control. So, nandyan. Debit sa work in process yan. Debit sa work in process yan. Ngayon, alamin natin kung magkano ang direct labor. Walang information directly kung magkano yan, but we can reconstruct from the following. Our ending work in process is 11,000. Kanina, kinompute natin. Nakita nyo dun sa information letter B. Ito. I'm letter D. Balik tayo. Sinabi dyan na ang sales ay 500,000. At ang gross profit rate, 30% of sales. Markup is 30% of sales. Therefore, the cost of goods sold ratio is 70%. So, using the finished goods account, we will reconstruct the cost of goods manufactured. Beginning finished goods is 34, ending finished goods is 30, and then we can compute for our cost of goods sold, 70% ng 500. So, 350 po. Total credits, 30, 350, 380. Of course, yung 30, hindi yan kinredit sa finished goods, ha? For T account analysis, the ending balance is posted in the opposite side to facilitate the analysis para babalansehin nyo na lang at madaling i-analyze. So, 30, 350, that's 380. Therefore, 380 minus 34, ayan, CGM, 346. Yang 346,000 na cost of goods manufactured, debit to finished goods, May kapartner yan na credit sa work in process. Ito, 346. Kaya kung 346,000 yung credit sa work in process, plus ending na 11,000, pinag-add nyo yan, actually, total cost of goods placed in process, ang makukompute nyo dyan eh. Ito, 357. 357. Minus, beginning work in process, makukompute nyo total manufacturing cost eh. At ito po yun. Na-compute na natin yung materials used, na-determine natin yung overhead. So, by working backward, may squeeze nyo to, no? Itong direct labor na 200,000. At, mayroon tayong indirect labor na 55. So, ang total labor pala is 255. We now analyze the accrued payroll account to determine kung magkano ang payment ng payroll. Beginning, accrued payroll is 13,000. Then the total payroll for the month is 255, ano? 200,000 na direct at 55,000 na indirect. Ayan. So, 268,000 minus 9,000, the total debit or the net, the debit, the amount of payment is 259,000 pesos. Yan. And then, for the collection naman, madali lang yun. Beginning AR plus sales minus ending accounts receivable, that's the amount of collection. Yan. So, yan po ang problem number 5 for correlation and reconstruction of account. Tapos na tayo sa problems 1, 2, 3, problems 4, problems 5, problems 6, 7, and 8. Dadako na tayo sa problem 9, 10, 11, and 12. And these are all about job order costing. But, break muna tayo saglit. Our part 1 ng Afar 15 is a total na 1 hour and 17 minutes. This is the first part. Break muna natin. And we will resume for the second video lecture for problems 9, 10, 11, and 12. And that will be devoted for job order costing. Thank you.